Welcome to Tartan Talks. I'm your host, Rocky, and today we're meeting with Simon Cotton and Emma Wilkinson from House of Edgar. So, Simon, Emma, thank you for joining us today. Give me your 30-second backstory. How did each of you come to the industry?
Emma, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. I started studying textiles in Edinburgh in 2013 after studying law and business for a couple of years before that. I realised that my calling was creative and I followed that, which I'm very, very glad that I did. I studied textiles at Edinburgh College of Art. I started out as a printer. Then I went to London in 2016 where I studied couture hand embroidery at the world's oldest embroidery atelier. So I've always cared about old things. When I came back, I finished my degree and I was very inspired by Edinburgh and my culture, my heritage, and I formulated my final collection around that, and it kind of just followed on from there. I learned how to make kilts after I graduated. I then learned how to weave tartan, and now I design tartan here at House of Edgar. So it's been about a 10-11 year story.
Okay,
nice. So you're pretty well-rounded in the industry. You know everything.
Lots of opportunities, and I've always followed them. I don't know everything, but one day I will.
Simon, what about you?
I know even less, but I've been doing it even longer, so there's something wrong here. So I've done 21 years in the Scottish textile industry. I did 11 years in sportswear and promotional wear for a company called Russell Corporation, which is an American company. And then 8 years running Johnson's of Elgin, which is a luxury cashmere manufacturer. And I've been here at McNaughton's for the last 2 and a bit years now, so 21 years in total. So I'm still a textile new boy in the Scottish textile industry.
So being as you know, knowledgeable and in-depth in all this as you guys are, what do you think tartan means to the national identity of Scotland? I think
tartan captures visually what Scotland is and who Scottish people are beautifully as well. It is one of the most iconic gifts that we have given to the world. We didn't invent it, but we made it what it is. I think its endurance is what makes it so special. It's had a long history full of lots of ups and downs, very exciting. I often say that the history of tartan is more exciting and more interesting than fiction could even have made up. It really, really is. It is something that when people see it, no matter where they are in the world, they think of Scotland, they think of Scottish people. It is kinship in a sense. And that's what makes it so special. And a lot of our identity as Scottish people is about our camaraderie and kinship, I think, which it captures.
What are the, let's talk for a minute about the influences on Highland dress in Scotland. What are the factors that influence what tartans, sell, or which ones are more popular? Is it media? Is it tradition? What are the influences on the tartan industry?
I think both are still really important. We stay true to our traditions here, which is a part of being Scottish that I'm definitely very proud of. We've stayed close to our traditions, our heritage, our culture. But the media definitely has played a strong role in tartan throughout history. We look back at Sir Walter Scott and what he did for tartan. His books wrote tartan into a brand new romantic existence that hadn't necessarily existed before. And that was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. We look at the punk era, that was the media, and that had an impact on tartan too. And here we are now. We've been through this Outlander chapter in tartan's history, and that definitely had an impact on tourism in Scotland, people's appetite for Scottish culture and history that could be paralleled in a way with what Scott did, which is exciting to see, definitely. And we've all benefited, I think, here and in the States from the Outlander effect. It's exciting to see what role media will play next. We've just had the Dior show, which threw tartan back into high street fashion, high-end fashion. There's almost nowhere you can go without seeing tartan again. So I think the media undoubtedly plays an important role in tartan's story, its endurance, its evolution as well. I think we've got to be careful of it too. We can't let the media tell a story and forget about tartan's true history and true story. And that's, I think, where we come in. We're here to talk about its beginnings and educate and share its real story, which, as I say, is almost better than anything anybody could make up. So it has strong positives, the media. It's definitely benefited from it throughout history, even now. And maybe we need to look at how we educate better on what really happened as well, to make sure that that's not lost in marketing and media too.
But this has always been, I think, the challenge. I mean, this is a 200-year-old fashion item. That doesn't happen. Fashion items come and go in a season. This has endured for such a long time. It's inevitable that it's changed, and there's been influences, and those influences have passed. And the amazing thing is actually the story is so enduring, and so much of it is pure and kept forward from generation to generation. So, but that sort of fight between, yes, fashion is picking it up and running with it, but then that can blow it into a different direction. But somehow it always manages to come through and find its own way, in maybe a slightly evolved form. But it's an incredible story when you think about it. I mean, what else sort of goes on with that level of consistency from generation to generation and gets loved and adopted by the next generation? It's quite unique.
I like the way you're kind of framing it as kind of a push and pull between the media and tradition and that kind of thing. In that, keeping that as kind of the backdrop, what do you think the greatest threat to the tartan industry is?
I think for me, looking at the industry, it is a tiny industry. We're only talking about a country of 5 million people, and generally when you buy a kilt, you wear it for the rest of your life, and you might hand it down to your children. So it's a very, very small sector. We all really depend on each other, and we try and work together where we can as good collaboration. And it's a fragile thing. It's an important thing. There's some brilliant companies in the sector, but it's as strong as the weakest part. And we're all this sort of network, this ecosystem that feeds each other. And nobody's here making millions of pounds. It's not an easy sector to come into. It's not an easy sector to be in, but it's something that people do because they love it and they believe in it. So that creates its own. It is resilient. I mean, as I say, it's gone nearly 200 years. It's doing more than most of the fashion world, to be honest with you, and people are loving tartan as much as they ever did. So that's fantastic, but that's as strong as the next generation.
I find it interesting how small the industry actually is, and how passionate the individuals and the companies within it are. And looking at it from the outside, like before I owned a company or started or knew anything really about it, you just kind of assume that it's always been there, it'll always be there. There's these huge players, and it's all going to be okay all the time, and not actually understanding how if this person died, or this person went bankrupt, or this person just decided, I don't want to do this thing anymore. How strangely perilous the industry in certain ways is, but at the same time, how passionate the people coming into it are to maintain it and push it forward and make sure that it doesn't go away. It's an interesting balance.
It is. I mean, if you look at this company, so the House of Edgar, McNaughton's the company name. So Blair McNaughton had his family had run this company for 7 generations. It was founded in 1783. And of course, as these things happen, there wasn't a natural succession. So they were looking for a solution. And they needed a solution, one of somebody who actually wanted to do it, but also had some experience in textiles and could get the backing. And that's not necessarily easy. I mean, everybody wants to set up .com businesses and AI businesses and whatever, but there's not a queue of venture capitalists going, I want to buy a traditional tartan mill and run it. So it is important, that next generation is not simple, and it's never going to be simple. But hopefully, with things like we're doing here, we can make it interesting for people and keep the sector going, as it has done for so long.
So, how much of a pressure or a mantle of responsibility, Simon, do you put on yourself with making sure that this thing, your baby, as it were, that Blair handed to you, how much pressure do you put on yourself to make sure that you're not letting down either Scotland or tartan or history? How do you see yourself in all this?
That's
now you put it like that, Rocky. I'm terrified. I said to somebody the other week that 80% of my job is worrying. It's just worrying about what's going to go wrong and all the rest of stuff. But you can't think like that. You've got to move things forward. We've got to do interesting and exciting things. I mean, we could sit on our hands and say, listen, this is preserved and never change anything. But that's not going to work. That's not the story of tartan. This is a vibrant, living thing that goes on and does morph and does embrace trends and does move forward. And it has to do that because otherwise it's not going to work. So, yeah, I feel the responsibility. I try not to let anybody else see that I feel a responsibility. So thank you for that, Rocky. But at the same time, you can't think about that too much. It's got to be alive and it's got to be fun.
So Emma, as the in-house tartan designer for McNaughton's for House of Edgar, how unique is your job, and what's your process in designing a tartan? And talk to me about how if either customers come to you and say, I need you to design this thing, or companies like us that say, here's a design, I need you to take it over to finish line and help me with the different colors and the thread counts and tweaking it.
I think I probably have one of the most unique jobs in the world, and it's not the job I thought when I was young that I would be doing. It's something that it evolved and it kind of found me. I say a dramatic kind of way. It was a journey, but it definitely did. And like I said, it wasn't what I really sought out to do. I didn't really know what I sought out to do, but it became very clear making kilts and having a lifelong interest in history, what it was that I should be doing and pulling textiles into that. It's a job. I think I've made the role here fit me in a sense and what I care about, and I'm lucky that I've been supported to do that. It's not just designing tartan, it's building relationships with like-minded people in the industry that care about what we do and care about preserving it and care about pushing it forward, and that's a part of it. There's also almost like a marketing side to what I do as well, where I advocate for tartan and how important it is and how special it is, which is great. And we do that here through design and through the relationships that we build with our customers as well. I've brought a lot of my care for the history of it into the role as well. And I'm very interested in the finer details, like giving our customers a beautiful selvage, So from one end of the cloth all the way over the design to the other end, I really care about how it looks. And I think that definitely comes from a kilt making background, where I think about what the main vessel of tartan is and what that finished product's going to look like. So it is as beautiful and enduring and long lasting and special to the customer as can be, knowing full well they're worn for life. You've got to really like it. So it is a very unique job. And the projects that I've got to work on here, for example, like the 1783 book and our new collection coming out soon, have been really special and have really exercised me as a designer. It's a strange job in that you get some colours and some straight lines and you need to think up something different every single time. It almost sounds impossible, but it isn't when you really care about it and you listen to people's stories and what it is they're trying to capture in tartan. They're always different, and there's no end to the possibilities of what we can give people, whether it's in the colour or the thread count. We can hide special numbers in it to give that extra layer of storytelling. all these things are possible literally just in colour and straight lines. So it's a special job as well, that you have that almost tiny breadth of things to do, but it's never ending, you know.
The one thing that you touched on that I've touched on in the past as well is I love your attention to detail. B, understanding of the whole process from kilt mail all the way up to kilt making and the finished garment, you know, all the way back to the beginning of selecting colors, how they balance each other out, where you're going to, you know, how big to make the set, where you want the selvage edge, that kind of stuff. It is, or how big you want particular sections to be or wide stripes to be, how much room you want to give them, because if you're going to pleat it to the stripe, you need extra room. These are all the kind of things that I think about when I'm designing a tartan, and it's wonderful to hear you say a similar kind of thing. It's the tiny little details, because you can see how it's all going to come together, and knowing that you can help a customer differently or better, I'll say better, in guiding them along the journey of creating a tartan, because you can point out the potholes that are going to exist in the road. It's neat to hear you have this similar experience to what I have in that.
All our designers here have to design tartan because it's such a big part of what we do, but we also do home interiors and accessories and things as well. But when I was speaking to Emma and trying to persuade her to join, she turned me down. And she said, all I want to do is design tartans, and I don't want to do these home interior fabrics, so I'm not interested. And I said, you can design tartans every day for the rest of your life, and you can go home and design tartans, and you can work on the weekends and design tartans. And then she agreed. So
I love it.
Nice.
I do. I'm lucky that I found the thing, albeit probably one of the nichest things you could get into, that really makes me tick. You know, I do love it. And we are so lucky here that it's not just, you know, there's a lot of, a customer going to have to design a beautiful tartan, and here's the thread count, put it into your system and weave it for us, you know. And it is great to see them come to life as well, and help, as you say, you know, spotting the pitfalls and explaining, if you make it like this, you'll get a more beautiful kilt, or whatever, you know, that comes up along the way. But there's also a lot of opportunity to create whole collections where we get to write and tell a story through 1783, for example, and our new collection. So there's breadth, and there's still a place for lots of creativity and things like that as we look to move it forward, which is really exciting. And, you know, one thing that I find really fun is the more I see, the better I'm getting at guessing what won't make it on the register. And that feels like an accomplishment when I get it right. You know, and being able to steer people into a new direction, because that's important too. People want to see them on the register because they're preserved there and they're almost part of the community in a sense.
So another thing you touched on is there's feeling like there's, you know, worrying about the fact that, you know, one is too similar to another, or, you know, coming up, constantly reinventing yourself as far as the designs and what inspires you. So how do you make each design unique enough that you feel like you've done two different things versus a very similar version of the same thing? And what are the things that inspire you to create a tartan?
My eyes and senses are always open to inspiration, and I think that's just somebody that's meant to be a designer. You know, you just take in information and you retain it, and then it reappears when you need it. You know, as a personal project at the moment, actually, what I'm doing is, instead of thinking about tartan and designing tartan in a visual sense, when I'm not here, I'm a very keen whiskey drinker, and maybe that helps with the inspiration. You know, that's where it comes from. But instead of designing it visually and going, you know, the green was the fields, and the gold is the barley, and the amber is the whiskey, or whatever, you know, I am tasting tartan. Oh my god, this is what we're doing. We're breathing it in and all sorts of. I am tasting whiskies, creating a colour palette from that, researching the distillery's history, and then in my own time creating tartans based on taste and flavour rather than visual inspiration. So I'm trying to push myself in a new direction and stay open to where you can find, inspiration from different senses, So my latest one has been Talisker 18, which is from Skye, and their slogan is made by the sea. And it's one of my favourites, and it's got a really unique flavour profile, and creating a tartan that it's not amber, it's not brown, it's blue, it's pink, it's green. Do you know what I mean? Because they're the colours that came to mind based on the flavours.
Yeah.
So it's being open to everything. When I'm in a rut, especially for a customer who's maybe not too sure what they want, and I've done like lots and lots that day and I need to take a step back, I always look back at history, always, because there's so many unexpected sets and colours that have been developed through time by hand weavers, who had endless possibilities when they were just warping the loom themselves. There was no constraints at all, more or less. I always look back at a historical book or a painting that I've seen from history, and that almost always spurs me on to do something for that customer that I actually wouldn't have thought of, or was in too much of a rut to think of something new. The past always helps in tartan, in my experience.
And whiskey.
I thought you were going to say that. I thought you were going to say when you get into a rut, you just have a drink.
That too.
We are clearly going to have to start breathalyzing the design team now.
You get one of those little, the things for your car keys or whatever. You can't start the car if you do the breathalyzer. Put it under keyboard.
As we come in the door in the morning, forget clocking in.
Yeah.
I do that in my own time. Anymore. But it's a new way to look at it, it's a new way to sort of play on your senses as a designer. It's not all visual. Do you know what I mean? Which is an interesting way to look at it. Mm-hmm.
No, when you said Talisker and Scott, or Talisker and the sea and that kind of stuff, I immediately thought of like navy blue, maybe a lighter shade of blue, maybe some lavender in there, and a bit of green. So as soon as you said that, I'm like, yeah, I see where she would go with it. And then you spit out the colors, and I'm like, holy crap, we're on the same page. So with creativity comes some experimentation. So how do you feel about some of the more, let's say, avant-garde decisions, whether it's a super large set at the last Commonwealth Games or some of the more experimental stuff that we saw at the V&A Dundee?
I think there's definitely a place for all of this. I like I said earlier, I always hope that it comes from a place where somebody's really cared about tartan and done a bit of research and understood its significance and appreciates that before using it as a jumping off point to create something brand new and exciting. I always think you've got to learn the rules before you break them, is kind of my sort of rule of thumb in the tartan world, for sure. I think to see it moving in different directions and playing around with set size and scale, and it's not new, as you'll see in the Genesis of Tartan. These things have been done, interestingly, before, which just shows you how deep tartan's history is and how much it is done already, which is really exciting to think that all those sort of centuries ago, people were playing with scale and colour in a really creative way, more creative than we could ever have actually imagined before doing the research to discover this. I definitely think there's a place for new and avant-garde, and it's been great to see what Dior did with tartan, for example, recently for their 2025 collection. It's been great to see what sort of upcoming young people, we work with schools sometimes, and what they come up with is quite exciting sometimes. They're not afraid of colour, they don't think commercially, so they take these great risks and create things that maybe we would never have thought of, which is always exciting to see. I like when people sort of mix their media too and see tartans that have maybe been printed over or embroidered, and they push what it is as a textile and use it as a canvas rather than the main thing, as we tend to as kilt makers. That's always exciting to see too. So I think that exhibition threw it into the spotlight, and I hope inspired a lot of people to learn about it and then put their own spin on it as well.
Simon, do you have any thoughts on it?
It needs to keep constantly being pushed and pulled. I mean, if we design into what we think sells, then we'll all design the same thing all the time, and it's going to look very, very samey and boring. And we don't want that. It needs to be everybody discovers their own place with tartan, their own relationship with it, and develop something that's right for them. And that's the beauty of it. So, we can all look at a book of tartans and say, we like this, we don't like this, and all the rest of stuff. And it is subjective. It's your own story, and how your story relates to that story, and how your story relates to that design. So I don't think we can try and preserve this in glass. And then that's an odd thing to say when we're talking about historic tartans, but it has to do both. It has to preserve the past and these amazing ancient designs, but also make sure tartan's still alive.
So one of the things that I've noticed about House of Edgar is the penchant for coming up with collections and doing it consistently over time. So whether it's back before both of your time, the 90s, coming up with the Irish County Collection that was groundbreaking for the time, or whether it's the playing around with the marled yarns in the Hebridean Collection or the 1783 collection, playing with what colors you're using in the designs. Can you speak a little bit to the reason you want to be fashion forward in coming up with different collections?
I think trend affects tartan, even though it's always there, and we have those clan tartans that many of us stay very loyal to and still order to be our kilts and things like that. It's exactly what we've been saying about, we know we do that, we do it beautifully, people love it and respect it, and that's amazing. But it has to evolve, and as people's tastes change, what the Victorians were wearing and what we're wearing now is within a thread, but it has moved on, and that is important too. We look at it in a more casual sense as well as a dressy sense now, which is great to see more people adopting kilts and wanting to wear them to more events, with jumpers instead of jackets, for example. We have to evolve. And I always think if you want young people to pick it up and continue wearing it, continue ordering it, continue wanting to work in this industry, you almost have to make it cool. And you have to take into account trend and its changes and what's popular at the time and not, for it to fit into that, to keep attracting new people to it all the time. So with the collections, that's exactly what we do. We look at what people aren't doing, and we will take risks sometimes, and we'll do that, like the marled grey yarns at the time. We'll also look at what's popular. So with 1783, it was an opportunity to tone down what we do, look at earthy tones that were becoming more and more popular in fashion, for example. And there was an appetite for that we saw from our customers, and we were talking to in kilt shops and things like that. We knew that there was a space for that. But what we did with that book that was different was we created some beautiful tartans. We incorporated Glen Affric, which fit in there beautifully and brought history into it. It brought new and history together, which is exactly what the tartan industry is all about. The old and the new have to be harmonious for it to continue enduring. But we also looked at how do we adapt the book and how it is consumed. And post-COVID, where we got used to using QR codes for everything, we saw an opportunity to add an extra layer to our books by adding QR codes on every single tartan with a story written about them. So again, the stories of tartan, even though they were, and a lot of those stories were based on historical tales or folklore or, Scottish people that had really made their mark on history, we wrote about them to do with the tartans that we were designed, that they inspired, allowed people to scan it and read it. So again, it was this idea of old and new technology and storytelling working together. So we're always pushing forward, and it's about people's appetite essentially and what people want at the time, and we're very aware of that.
And I think it's important that we don't try and do a sort of Me Too version of what other mills are doing. I mean, it's very easy to sit there and go, okay, well, this is the most successful product from this mill, let's do that. It's not about that. We're trying to make the sector vibrant. We're trying to keep Highland wear alive and interesting. So it's important, as Emma said, to design something that other people aren't doing, and to come up with something as far as it's possible in a 200-year-old sector to to do something new, to push on a little bit, because that makes it more fun and more interesting for everybody. And yes, it's cultural, it's important, it's serious, and all the rest of it, but it's fun. It should be fun. It should be enjoyable. People should get pleasure from wearing their kilt, not just have it as something that sits in a museum.
Agreed. So with the new Tartan Genesis collection, you're breaking from your normal fashion forward kind of thing and planting a foot firmly in the past. And the other thing I've noticed is you're putting, in the time that I've known Edgar McNaughton's, you're putting seemingly more effort into the storytelling of this collection, whether, from the book through, media, through, interviews like this. Why is this collection so different and so important to you?
I think this collection, it looks at tartan in a way that books haven't done before. These tartans are of wonderful historic significance. They don't just tell the story of tartan, they're telling the story of Scotland as well. They capture points in time that brought us to where we are now, and they are a memory, and they retell the story of some truly amazing and significant people that made their mark on our history and our culture too. And I think the fact that we've put the emphasis and the time into getting that right is what sets this apart from other books. It's not just about tartan and you can choose a tartan, get a kilt made from it. Lovely. We're great at doing that. This was about the story and retelling tartans that maybe they've not quite been forgotten, but they're definitely not in the market, as they are now. They are risky tartans, some of them, and that's what makes them so beautiful. They are bright, they are vibrant. They remind us that historical tartans are not brown and muddied and washed out. They were beautiful, and it's amazing to see that you go back 200-300 years, the depth of colour that Highland weavers were able to achieve. It's a beautiful illustration of time that I think sets it apart from all other books. It hasn't been done before, I don't think. Well, I think its closest relative is probably, Stuart's Old and Rare Scottish Tartans from 1893, where he wrote about the history of tartan, and then he had the plates of the designs afterwards. And we were definitely very inspired by books like this, books like the Vestiarium Scoticum by the Sobieski Stuarts. And we've almost jumped off from where they left off in the 1800s to do something similar today. And I think it'll open people's eyes up to tartan's story, Scotland's story, how far tartan has come, but also how true to itself it's stayed. I'm really excited about this book, and I think because it is such a departure from just producing 30 beautiful new tartans, this is about the story.
And hopefully it's a little bit more legitimate than the Sobieski Stuarts, and I think you have achieved that.
We wrote it, so
I think everyone thinks they know the story of Scottish tartans, and it's the clan story. That's what everybody automatically gravitates to. And what was interesting with the Glenafric was it opened up this whole prehistory, and it got us looking at, what does this actually mean? The aficionados, know about this, but I don't think it's ever been told in this way. I mean, this is the origin story of tartan. This is the start of it before the whole clan thing exploded, and kind of takes you into that, so it does make the rest of it make sense and mean something, so, tartan didn't appear out of nowhere. It comes from a rich cultural heritage, but to see that so long ago, before that explosion of clan tartans, people were being incredibly creative and incredibly skilled in what they were creating as well. The craftsmanship and the artistry is quite inspiring.
I'm gonna let out my inner nerd for a second, and it's in a good way. It's like the Star Wars prequels. You have the entire, the original trilogy, And now we understand all that. And now we're going back to, okay, well, what happened before that? And how did it get to that spot? And I love the fact that you're trying to retell the history and cobble together pieces of what is known or not known, or fill in the gaps with Peter's help, of understanding how tartans evolved to get to that point, and kind of celebrating some of the older stuff there.
Absolutely, and it's those different strains of it as well. You know, tartan as military wear as a thing. The tartan, the importance of the weavers and how those come through. Tartan as a symbol of rebellion. You know, all those bits are within the stories, and the stories are, you know, just fantastic stories in their own right. So, yeah, it's. I think it sounds a bit pretentious, but it is actually a privilege to be able to tell those stories.
We're celebrating tartan through this collection. We're definitely celebrating its story and the people who have been involved, from, you know, Charles Edward Stewart all the way to weavers, Wilsons of Bannockburn. And that's, I think, where our kind of appreciation for this came from. We are weavers, and we looked back at what had been achieved before. And yeah, I think it was the right time to do a book like this. I think the industry was almost ready, especially after the success of Glen Affric, to see more exploration into historical sets. And I hope it opens the door to more recreation and understanding of what's come before.
Yeah, and in a way, you're celebrating your historical contemporaries.
Definitely.
Totally, yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. Talk about the Glen Affric tartan and how that project kind of came to be.
We'll both start on that one. So we were approached by the Scottish Tartans Authority because on the back of the V&A tartan, the V&A in Dundee had the tartan exhibition, and within that they'd been asked to bring for exhibits which represented their oldest tartan, and the Glen Affric sort of got brought out into the sunlight.
Yeah.
And Peter, as a result of all the research he'd done, came to us with the Scottish Tartans Authority to say, you know, could we recreate this? And it was a bizarre one. Now, when we look back and think about it, we did it not because we were looking for a commercial success. We did it because it was kind of fun and interesting to do, to be honest with you. Somebody comes up with the oldest tartan and says, can you make this again? And we looked at it, and we looked at the designs, and we went, well, it's not what we would design today. So, you know, I don't know if anybody's going to wear this. People loved the story. And actually, people love the design now. Yeah. But, you know, there's no way in a million years we'd have designed that from scratch then, which just goes to show that there is something, you know, there is something there. But it was never thought of as, you know, let's create a new collection or anything like that. It was just Peter coming to us and saying, and Peter and John coming to us and saying, this would be fun to do. Would you help us do it? And we can't resist things like that, to be honest with you. So, yeah.
It was a really exciting project to be part of, actually. It was kind of almost an honour in a way, actually, to be part of the Glen Affric tartan's history, you know, and allow people today to enjoy it and to start a conversation about who did it belong to, what were they doing, why were they there, how did it get there, you know. It was exciting in itself, you know, and I think I was definitely very blown away by how excited people were about this old Scottish tartan, you know, and it was seen around the world. And yeah, to be part of allowing people to enjoy it again today was a real highlight of being here, definitely.
It was funny. Peter and Emma would sit in this room and they'd be sort of going for hours over slight differences in shades and arguing over what was the right thing and all the rest of it. And at the same time, I could make no contribution to this whatsoever, but I'd be finding excuses to come in and just be nosy and, you know, anybody want a cup of coffee? Anybody want a cup of tea? And just because it's so fascinating. And when you hear Peter bring to life his investigation as well of, you know, what he supposes about where this fabric might have been coming from and where it was going to and what the story was behind it, it really is living history. It's very dynamic. So I started to get excited as we went along, because I was thinking, you know what, if other people who haven't come from a tartan background get as excited about me as this, then it's going to be lots of fun. And that's when we decided, okay, we'll get a PR agency involved, and we'll run some PR around the world, and we'll see what happens. And then we ended up with 600 articles and stories happening all over the globe. Picked up by the Smithsonian, picked up in, I think, was it you or Peter did interviews in Australia for the, so it just captured people's imagination, but from a tiny, tiny start.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of us in here and Drew Barrymore then wearing it. That was crazy.
Yeah.
Did it surprise you, the breadth of people being excited about it? And I know we spoke before. You said that roughly like 50% of your sales of the Glen Afric was in the U.S. Did that shock you? Did you expect it to be more Scottish people going, hey, this is the cool new oldest thing? Or was it a surprise that it was as international as it was?
I don't think the international part was a surprise.
No.
Because we know that the person who's got a connection with Scotland International really is interested in the heritage. And this is the ultimate heritage story, isn't it? I mean, there's no more heritage that you can put into something than the oldest possible tartan. So I don't think it surprised us that there was the international interest. I think it's still heartwarming to see people in America, in Canada, in Australia, in Germany, embracing tartan in the way that they do. That's absolutely, it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's very special. So no, it wasn't a surprise, but it was very nice.
Let's pivot now from Glen Afric to the full Tartan Genesis collection. Take me through the process of, Glen Afric comes out, it's a commercial success by all accounts. And how did the idea for the Tartan Genesis project kind of come together?
So after Glen Afric had come about, we were sitting in this room, and we were just talking about, well, this has been, blown us away, just complete, beyond our expectations. And the question then was, well, is there more we can do in this direction? Because what we realized out of that is people want the stories. They don't just want to buy a piece of fabric. They want to actually, experience the history and be part of the history and part of the heritage. So we started kicking around ideas for what that might look like. And we kicked around quite a lot of ideas, to be honest. It wasn't that, straight away these ones emerged, because it took quite a while.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But now when we look at them, it's like, well, of course it's those ones.
It's obvious.
Yeah, it's like, well, these stories, they build together.
Yeah.
It's like compendiums of a book. They build together to create a complete story. Don't they?
They're real chapters, I think. And like I said, it's in Tartan's history, it's in Scotland's history. This tells it all. I think it started off as like a little seed of an idea that came from how proud and almost overwhelmed we were about how people reacted to Glen Afric. And I suppose it did take a couple of forms, but I think we always knew it was going to be rooted in storytelling more than anything else, and to get that out there. So yeah, we've definitely got the right lineup now.
Yeah. And within that, it was not let's just create some fabrics. It's let's tell these stories again. That was the key about it. Is the whole Glen Afric thing. It almost told its own story. It sucked you in. Whereas with these ones, we actually wanted to get in there, and there was such brilliant stories around there. Is tell them and bring it to life again, which is a little bit difficult from how you'd work on a contemporary tartan. So it gives it another dimension, doesn't it?
So how did you whittle it down to the 6th? If you would, give me a little insight on how many were you considering, maybe? Which different ones? How wide? Did you just start at 15 and you pulled it down? And why did you pick the 6 that you picked?
I read every word on Peter's website. And very, very quickly, I think we knew we couldn't do it without him. You know, Peter is a fountain of knowledge. You know,
and Peter McDonald, for those watching this who don't know who we're talking about Peter McDonald, tartan historian.
He's the top of his game. You know, he's the man to go to when it comes to talking about tartan's history and from its weaving to the stories behind it. So we knew early on that we wanted to work with Peter again, and that he was going to help us get the right tartans to move forward with, certainly. And it wasn't as streamlined as we've got 15 now, let's bring it down. It kind of, it wove in and out, and we would find a beautiful set, but it maybe didn't have a very strong story, you know, and that was what was really important. You know, it wasn't, oh great, that's lovely, it'll sell really well, I know it's from 18 whatever. That wasn't the factors that motivated us to choose what we did. It was really the storytelling. So we had to get to know a lot of tartans before knowing for certain what the right ones were. And we had an inkling. We knew that we wanted to tell a Jacobite story. We knew we wanted to tell a weaving story. We knew we were going to start with Glenafric. And it was just about piecing almost the bookends together to create something that ran through a sort of a thread of time that people could follow, people would invest in and want to keep reading as well. And really the tartan is just the illustration of that. I think what we've ended up with is amazing stories. And I learned a lot looking into this project as well. But also tartans that are unexpected, but really beautiful in their own right. And I think even though they don't all fit into trend necessarily, they could start a new trend. They could be brought back and really pivot tartan back into something it didn't expect to go to, which is exciting.
And I think one thing we did always expect it to be about 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have easily put more in, and I'm sure Emma would have liked to have done more, and Peter would certainly have liked to have done more. But we needed these stories to have space, because it would have been a shame to have, 20 odd stories. When these stories are so powerful and so resonant and so emotive, you don't want to clutter them. They're special things in itself. And it was almost like, well, you could do one a year, because actually there's a year's worth of storytelling in each one. So we wanted to keep it quite tight, because we wanted the stories to have space to be what they really are, which is, they're little Hollywood novels in their own right,
In learning about your collection and getting the sneak preview, as it were, you inspired us in the way that you approached it, and I see exactly what you're doing is trying to tell the story of Scotland through tartans. So, like in doing our piece on the Cloth Rebellion, we're inspired by telling a story through the tartan and through a historical story through tartan, and looking at history through that lens and through the lens of fashion to a degree. It's a very interesting way to go about it.
That's the lovely thing, isn't it? You're creating the story from within this really, really rich history, and there's different angles to that story, and there's different ways to come on. You can tell the story of the Jacobites, you can tell the story of military tartan, you can approach this and you can tell the story of weaving and natural dyeing and all these things. There's all these stories within it. And in some ways, the skill of Emma in terms of creating the book and the narrative around it is carving out what goes in and what comes out, because actually there's so much within this, and it's just trying to keep that sort of narrative thread nice and clean and pure.
I think we've looked back to move forward, and I think that's so important, especially in something like this. And this is a kind of, I think, a real special point in tartan story to do this now and put it out there.
Yeah, and it's kind of the counterbalance to all the fashion forward stuff that you guys do. This is a way to not only push things forward, but pull them backwards and keep it rooted in its origin story, in what tradition and history. And it's a way to, to allow you the grace, if you want to use that term, to go forward and play with it in a fashion way, because you're still pulling it at it the other direction. You're just, you're kneading the dough that is tartan.
Totally.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about Peter and his Peter McDonald and his influence in the project. How was it he who approached you, or you who approached him, and how did he help in selecting the tartans that you ended up choosing?
I think I burst into your office and just went, "We can't do this without Peter McDonald."
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Did you put out the tartan symbol in the sky and call to him as if he were
Right.
Batman, and he shows up in a tartan cape?
Exactly. If you say his name 3 times, it just appears. You know what it's
So more of a Beetlejuice type character. Okay, fair.
Mill sense. I totally stand by that though. Like there's no way we could have done this the justice that it deserved without Peter's years of incredible knowledge and expertise. We really couldn't have. And I think the more I started the research, the more we spoke about it, the clearer it became that Peter really had to be a part of it. So we asked Peter to sort of join us on this project.
I think my view was we either do this credibly and authentically and as accurate as we possibly can, and we don't do it at all. There's people who have in the past, including us, have looked at some of these tartans and done something which can best be described as inspired by the original design. They're not true recreations of the original design. So we wanted to make this the absolutely definitive, work, and it needed Peter for that. It needed, and Peter's talked about this as the culmination of his career in terms of creating, all the work he's done over decades, which is hugely valuable to the industry. I mean, without what he's done, so much would have been lost or misinterpreted, and actually to sort of go back into history and say, well, actually, no, this is what it was like. This is what it would have looked like. Not this is what the commercial representations of it are. So it's nice to support that, but it's also hugely important for us to be supported by that. That's what makes it worthwhile doing this.
I think on a personal note, for me, my own knowledge and passion for tartan, I have a lot to thank Peter for. He's been very supportive of me. He's shared lots of knowledge, that I would never have found anywhere else, and he cares about it so much. And I think I've really been inspired by Peter's interest in it and his love for it. And he's a trustee on the authority, and then I got made a trustee and brought on board as well. And it's just, I suppose, having him almost very loosely as a kind of mentor and somebody to look up to in this industry has been really motivational and inspirational for me too. And I'm very, very lucky that I've got to work closely with him on these 2 projects. It's been amazing. I've learned so much from him.
It's also fair to say it's probably terrifying working with such a well-respected historian, because you don't want to get anything wrong, whether it's wrong in the storytelling or wrong in the recreation or whatever. You just want him to go, yeah, that you got it right. You got it right. So yeah, it keeps us honest.
Spoke to Peter recently and kind of touched on the concept of legacy, purity, legacy, and all the things that we're setting up in our own lives. So, and looking at Peter's work with Loch Heron in doing the tartan for the Chief of Clan Grant, in his projects with you through Glenafric and through the Tartan Genesis collection, and maintaining that purity and passing on the knowledge and passing on things that he's contributing to the industry and to the world as far as, preserving tartans and preserving history. That is part of his legacy. That is now part of House of Edgar's legacy, in the same way that us doing like these videos and stuff like that, that is part of our legacy. And it's interesting looking at different characters in this play of life, so to speak, that all kind of, come together or intersect at different points and have an effect on each other, and all contribute to the same story, and all contribute to maintaining things and pushing it forward. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, other than it's interesting to think about all of this through the lens of legacy and what we are leaving for future generations, and for the legacy of tartan and our contributions to it.
Absolutely. I was speaking to some people who restore Scottish monuments and buildings, and we started talking about this project, and it's amazing. I mean, this is as important to our cultural heritage as restoring a castle or restoring a stately home or whatever. And to be honest with you, Peter's led the charge on this. So yeah, it's an honor to work with him on it.
So out of the 6 tartans as part of the collection, and we'll take Glen Affric out of it because that one's been out for a little bit. What tartans are each of you either most excited about, most hopeful for? What do you think about the collection? Give me one that you're psyched to see what happens with.
I think the Culloden coat tartan will be the best seller, and it's probably my favourite. I think it speaks to people today as much as it did back then, and its colour palette, the set, the size of the set as well. I think that one will do really well, and it is really beautiful, and it's amazing to think that when that tartan came to being around about 1746, that all this time later we would be designing tartans in a very, very similar way, in a colour palette that still speaks to people now as well. So I am excited about that one. When I first did the CADs for Royal Archers, I was absolutely terrified. It is a huge set and the colours are intense. But now, and especially after seeing it woven, seeing it photographed as a kilt, seeing it worn, I am really excited about that one. I think it was the wild card, it was the risk, because it is a bit wilder than what we produce now. But there's real beauty and excitement in that. But in terms of its story, the Jacobite Remnant tartan, which is the recreation of the Moyhall Plaid, is probably my personal favourite, because Colonel Anne McIntosh is one of my kind of favourite historical heroes to talk about. This Jacobite woman just bossing people around and gathering her clansmen and making them go off and fight. I like that. I think that's cool. And so I'm excited about that one for its story. To be honest, they're all really special, and I've got to know them all so well, from seeing the originals through discovering their stories and writing about it, then going up to see them getting woven, seeing them turn into kilts. I am so close to them all. It's actually really hard. They're all my favourite.
Yeah, pick a favorite child. Exactly.
So the story that I didn't know at all, in fact, most of them I didn't know particularly well, and Emma had to correct me and Peter had to correct me, but the lost tartan story of Wilson's of Bannockburn, and how a textile mill responded to the limitations on tartan and actually made that into gave birth to this whole regenesis of tartan. That's something really quite special. And the fact that the tartan was lost and wasn't woven and wasn't in use for such a long period of time, and then there's been this opportunity to say, okay, well, let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate what this one mill responding to tartan being limited in its usage actually then took that and became, used that as a platform to create the whole modern tartan industry, really. That's got to be fantastic from my point of view as somebody with a tartan weaving company.
I think it was you that said it. You know, the weavers succeeded where the warriors didn't. You know, it was weavers that eventually kept, preserved, moved tartan forward in this way that is endured for 200 years now. It's amazing. Wilson's sort of gave us the clan tartans, if you like, as we would recognise them, today. In the most part, some of them are older and stuff. We won't go into all the ins and outs of the history, but they did succeed after battles, after law was introduced, all of these things, they kept it, and they gave us it to continue today.
And by it, not just tartan, but Scottish cultural identity. I mean, that if we didn't have tartan today, what does Scotland look like as a distinctive, country? So yeah, it's again, the opportunity to celebrate that, the opportunity to recognize that, to tell the story, it's lovely.
So if you could change one thing about how tartan is preserved, treated culturally, socially, in today's world, what would that be? How would that be? And or is there something that we are lacking?
I think there's a place for more education on its history and what it really is. I grew up in Edinburgh, and I used to walk up and down the Royal Mile, and it was all Jimmy hats, and it was a very dumbed down version of tartan. So it took me until I was about 25 to even with a dad who was a piper and wearing a kilt to school, and family who were in kilted Highland regiments at the time. It took me all that time to see it and to want to learn about it for what it really is, because it wasn't presented to me really in any other way from what I was seeing on the Royal Mile. No one was saying, but have you heard about this? Have you heard about this? I think it's kind of missing from maybe our education at school, or what we talk about at home, or what the media feeds us. I think it could really take great strides there, that more people understand its significance, both as a cultural identity and as, like you said earlier, it is the illustration of Scotland. You cannot think of Scotland without tartan, and you cannot think of tartan without thinking of Scotland, and I think teaching people about its history and how it is endured like no other, textile or icon. It is so unique, and it is so special. And I think that should be, especially in Scotland, celebrated and taught more.
I think that's absolutely right. It's not a pattern. It's not. That's only the one dimension of it. This is a rich, multi-dimensional thing. And there's heritage built into it, there's meaning built into it, in a way that I've been in textiles for a long time. There's nothing that does this. There's nothing that can tell stories in the same way as we can tell them with tartans. And I think it's right to say, that's not always appreciated, because people just see, a nice pattern, and that's fine. But I think, the more people get to know and understand it, the more they fall in love with it.
It's such a powerful thing. I don't think there's any other textile, there's no other cloth out there that is so divisive and can cause so many fallouts, but at the same time bring people together like anything else. It is so special, and it's family as well, and I think that's an added element to it that makes it really pull at the heartstrings. And I do think, as Scottish people, we should all appreciate it more and be very proud that even today we've kept our identity and our culture really close to our hearts, and it's still very present. That's quite unique, and it should be celebrated and preserved.
I would say wherever those Scottish people are in the world.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting to have a celebration, a cloth that is so historical and rooted in such history, yet so fashion forward simultaneously. It is a beautiful thing to see, period. So, Simon and Emma, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for coming out with this Tartan Genesis collection. I'm very, very excited to see the reception that the world gives it, and it's very important that stuff like this exists. So from one one company to another, thank you for doing the stuff that you do to preserve the legacy of tartan for future generations.
Thank you for helping us tell the story. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to see the tartans we were talking about in this video, the link is going to be down in the description. If you like historical Celtic content like this, it would mean the world to us if you subscribe to the channel.